Listen to the sequence of 2-note chords and tell me if you can hear what it's actually doing. Did you hear it? These 2 notes at a time can actually trick your brain into hearing the entire harmonic context. You may have guessed it, those are just 2-5-1s, but why is it that without the context of the root, you can still hear what's going on? If you're feeling a little lost, I'll demonstrate it now with the roots, and then we'll remove the roots again, and you'll realize I'm still hearing the entire context. Watch this. And then if we take the roots out one more time, what's happening there? Why does that work? Well, before we answer that question, we have to remind ourselves the system that we use when we're talking about chord structures in harmony, and that is the number system. You see, when we're using the number system, we make it easier for ourselves to talk about chords in any key, because no matter what key you're in, you're still just going to refer to them with the same set of numbers. If our home base is B flat major, well then B flat is 1, C is 2, D is 3, and so on and so forth. We use the major scale as a basis, and then we work off of that, making alterations as necessary. So what is it about these 2 notes that makes it incredibly easy to hear the harmonic context without the harmonic context even really being there? In order to address that, we need to talk about the most important components to any chord. Now, it would be totally natural to think about chords and say, well, when somebody asks you, well, what's the most important note of the chord? The first thing that comes to mind might be, well, the root. And that, of course, makes sense. After all, the root does kind of tell us what chord it is. I mean, if I were to just play this with no other context, well, that could either be, or it could be, or it could even be. That information with no other context is not really telling us all that much. So that's a totally natural answer to say, well, the root has got to be the most important note. Well, then what is it? Perhaps it's the 5th. Well, here's the thing about the 5th. It is not important at all in the slightest. It never needs to be there. It gives us no information at all. It is pretty much the most useless note in a chord. Well, when we're talking about our basic triads, just 3-note chords, that only leaves us with one other option, and that is the 3rd. When we're talking about chords, we build them out of the notes of their respective major scales. So for example, a C major triad, well, that's just built from the notes from the C major scale. And to make a basic triad, we happen to use 1, 3, and 5. 1, 3, 5. That's how we come up with the C major triad. Now, the 3rd is the most important note out of those because it is the only one that actually tells us anything at all about the chord. And of course, the root tells us what chord it actually is, but other than that, it doesn't give us any information. And most importantly, it does not give us any information about whether the chord is major or minor. This is where the 3rd comes into play. This is a C major triad. It consists of the 1, the naturally occurring major 3rd, and the 5th. But what do I need to change about this chord to make it minor? That's a C minor triad, and as you can see, the only thing I moved is that 3rd. It doesn't matter how many upper extensions we add on top of that, we don't know anything about the chord if it's not defined as major or minor. So once we've defined a chord as being major or minor, then you could reasonably say that the next most important note is the root, because, well, you can't just have a 3rd because that would just be a single note. I mean, this could be a major 3rd of D, or it could be a minor 3rd of E flat. So yeah, the root is, of course, an extremely important component to even knowing what chord we're playing at all. And it's what even allows the 3rd to be a 3rd and not just a random note. However, there is another chord tone that makes a giant difference of the quality and the nature of any given chord. And that, of course, is the 7th. Going back to our 2-note illusion here, this chord, when we add the root, is actually a C minor 7th chord. It consists of a root, a minor 3rd, and a minor 7th. Watch what happens if I add the 5th. It has the exact same function. This note didn't do anything for us. It can be there, it can not be there. It doesn't make a difference to the functionality of the chord. It's still the same chord. That's why the 5th doesn't really matter that much. The 7th, on the other hand, can completely change the nature of the chord. If I make that 7th a natural or a major 7th, Now this is a completely different chord. We still are in the world of minor as defined by our third, which, like we said, is the most important note. However, that seventh is giving us this whole other piece of information that drastically changes the actual usage of this chord. That's what we might call a minor major 7 chord. This is just a minor 7 chord. So why is it that this works? Okay, let's just look at that first 2, 5, 1 in the key of B flat. As we said, our first chord is a C minor 7. We use the flat 3 and the flat 7. And then the next chord is an F dominant chord. And we have a major third and a flat 7. Now let's go to our 1. This is a B flat major 7 chord. We have a major third and a major 7th. So we went minor third minor 7th, major third minor 7th, flat 7, major third, major 7. But look at how we moved these notes. And this is where the importance of a leading tone is going to come into play. A leading tone is usually most simply defined as a note that's a half step away from the resolution. A fourth to a third is a really great leading tone because it's a half step away and you can really feel that compelling resolution. However, a second to a root is not going to work quite as well because, well, that's a whole step. That's not a half step resolution. And thus, it doesn't have the same compelling feel to want to resolve. So we generally think of leading tones as half step resolutions from one place to another. And let's take a look at the leading tones going on in here, right? From our C minor 7th chord, we shift our root, but what happens with our thirds and our 7ths? Well, all we had to do is drop our B flat to an A. That's a very nice transition from one chord to the next. And our flat third in C became our flat 7 in F. One more time. Our flat third of the C minor chord became our flat 7 in the F chord. See how that works? That's why this is super cool, and you can do this with only 2 notes, right? And then our 7th resolves to our 3rd. Now, 7th resolves to the 3rd. 7th resolves to the 3rd. Watch what happens when we go from 5 to 1. Our 7th resolved to the 3rd of our 1 chord. And the 3rd of our 5 chord became the 7th. You see what's happening here? We're basically like flip-flopping our 3rds and 7ths. Our 3rds become our 7ths, and then the 7th resolves to the 3rd. The 3rd becomes the 7th resolves to the 3rd. That's why we can do this and your brain can still hear the harmonic resolution of a 2-5-1. And we're doing it exclusively using the 3rds and the 7ths of each of these chords. And the cool part with all of this is that it doesn't matter how many upper extensions we add or how many alterations we make, they're just color tones. They just add more interest to the chord on top of what's already there. But at the root of it, it still is the 3rd and the 7th that makes all the difference in the world. It defines the quality of the chord, and then the 7th tells us even more information about the quality of the chord as well as where that chord is trying to go. That minor 2 chord wants to resolve to the 5 chord, and then that 5 chord with the dominant 7th wants to resolve to our 1 chord. That's one of the reasons the 2-5-1 is so effective, because the leading tones in each of those chords, it's just asking for each one to be resolved into the next one. And this is a really cool way to play around with the circle of fifths. If you just take the circle and you go around it clockwise, you can take any 3 points going in that direction. Let's take C, F, B flat, for example. Just play each of those chords, minor 7th, dominant, major. You find yourself playing a 2-5-1. That's literally what a 2-5-1 is. It's one of the reasons they work so well. We're literally just hijacking the circle of fifths and going around it clockwise. And if you take that chord that you just landed on, make it a minor 7th, and continue this process around the circle, you can wind your way all around the circle back to C. It's a fun exercise to practice 2-5-1s and to familiarize yourself with them in every single key. It's one of the things that makes the circle of fifths so fascinating in the way that it just seems to naturally work. There's pretty much no other intervallic relationship that winds its way through all of the different keys in this manner. And there are certainly no other notes of the chord that define each and every chord in as much detail as the 3rd and the 7th to the extent that you don't even need any of the other ones. Try this trick on your own. Play a 2-5-1, even just basic voicings works just fine, and then drop everything except the 3rds and the 7ths and show yourself how these relationships work. And so on and so forth. It is a fascinating aspect of harmony and music theory, and it's one of the reasons why learning theory can be so interesting. I mean, that's one of the reasons why in our Intro to Piano course, we actually talk about some of these theoretical aspects. Now, we don't get super in-depth, especially on a beginner level, but we do introduce a lot of the necessary concepts. And right now, just as a reminder, you can actually get 30% off your purchase with code MusicTheory30. There's a link in the description down below. The Intro to Piano course is full of incredibly detailed animations and graphics. Everything is explained in depth, and there are tons of actionable steps and exercises for you to practice this stuff on your own. You can download PDF resources, there's backing tracks. If you're looking to improve your skills on improvisation, we have an Intro to Improv course, as well as a course all about understanding and applying modes. Go try this 2-5-1 exercise and see if you can get yourself to hear these 2-5-1s with only the 3rds and the 7ths. It's a really cool device, and it can really help you understand and learn how to build voicings around the 3rd and the 7th. That's gonna be it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.